this is like not an optimal froth factor because it's like too much.
No such thing as too much. I have a cup of tea that is one tea bag from last night and one from this morning. So equally fancy.
I love it.
Welcome back to Talk Fiction, the podcast dedicated to entertainment media's most overlooked underdogs, fiction writers. I'm your host, Meg Olders, author of C. Smile and creator of the dynamic newsletter anthology, Beautiful, Daring, Stupid. With me today is romance writer, TV and film analyst, and pop culture critic Beth Lizagorski, creator of the newsletter You Need to Watch This, where she offers highly entertaining reviews, thoughtful recommendations, and sparkling commentary on all the movies, shows, albums, celebrity dramas, and books you only wish you had the time to consume yourself. Beth is also author of Clicking and Waiting, a workplace romance currently stationed on Substack and, without giving too much away, destined for an upgrade in publishing accommodations in the not-too-distant future. Stay tuned. I will provide links to Beth's fresh and funny fiction and apt entertainment analyses in the show notes, but without further ado, allow me to introduce my distinguished guest and fellow lovemonger, Beth Lizagorski.
Thank you, Meg, for having me today. And I'm still like gushing over that recommendation and just introduction. I think you need to like write a book about that once you've published your YA books or in parallel with it.
It is my favorite part of the podcast is writing the introduction. And did I pronounce your last name correctly? Because we've been talking for like a year and I don't know if I did.
You got it great. Yes. Beautiful. I was happy you didn't call me Ligorski. So
no, there's definitely a Lizzo in there. You've got like
right. Yeah, and not to be confused with the singer, you know.
Right. Or you can be confused with
I'm totally okay with that too.
Yes.
There's some mad talent going on there. Yeah.
Okay. So we are here today to talk about romance. And we're really only going to be able to talk about it in like the tiniest of subsections because we could talk about this for an entire podcast season or several. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So for now, we're just going to get to what we can get to on this subject because Beth and I both write romance and we both read and consume it quite regularly. Although I have to say, I don't think I know anyone who consumes more than you. Shocking.
It is pretty shocking how much I can consume. And I will admit to at times double screening, right? So that phenomenon of watching something, but then also reading something while I'm watching something.
I don't understand how your brain does it.
My brain just seems to be able to operate on those levels. But like
yes.
The other thing is just having to stay focused attention for a long period. That can be challenging, but like balancing a bunch of different things and juggling, I definitely feel that.
I was going to say, it's clearly your passion. And I feel like people find ways to squeeze that into their day.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you saying you were like waiting in the car one day for your son and you were just watching a show on your phone. And I'm like, that never occurred to me. Like if I'm sitting and waiting for my kids, I'll do something mindless, like scroll social media, which is not nearly as fun as, watching Heated Rivalry or
I think it might have been Heated Rivalry. It has to be, Meg, just to clarify, for me to take my phone to watch something in the car, it has to be something I'm really locked into. So Heated Rivalry, Bridgerton, like there's certain shows, and I will rewatch those episodes on a bigger screen.
I was going to say, because there's so much, sweat and sinew to be consumed.
That's right.
It requires a bigger screen.
100%. And yet I will also say that at times I'm embarrassed to watch on our super, super big TV screen downstairs. But embarrassed might not be the right word because I just know it's a shared screen with the kids and other people. And so, and my husband and dog and, so I generally watch some of this content on my laptop or iPad. I remember I worked with somebody when I was probably in my early 30s at the time, and she was in her late 40s or early 50s. And I remember her telling me about like her favorite time of day is going to bed like at 8:00 and taking her iPad out and just watching something.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, why is she doing that? Like, why wouldn't she just watch it on the big? And then now I've reached that age where I'm like, I totally know what this woman was talking about. There's something so coveted about that alone time. And whether it's watching or reading a romance book, like I'm totally there. Yeah.
Well, and for me too, especially with watching, it's about feeling free to like feel all the stuff. Like
Yes.
even with my husband, you know what I mean? Like I've been married for 20 years. So like we know each other intimately, not to give too much away, but watching really romantic stuff, I like to be by myself for that.
Yeah, me too.
It's not like I can't enjoy it with someone else, but I feel stifled. Like I want to gasp if I feel like, or, It's hard to do that with other people in the room.
It is.
So let me ask you this. When did you first fall in love with romance as a genre? And I'm curious, how old you were and what types of things you were reading, watching, listening to at that time that kind of got you stuck on it.
So this is not a straightforward answer because there are different parts of my journey. So I would say I'm separating it out into the reading journey and then also the watching journey. Okay.
Okay.
And so for reading, I will say that is a more recent time frame, and really mostly in COVID, I started to do that. People started to learn how to bake bread. I don't know if that was the time you started doing sourdough, but I'm
No, that was more recently. But I did start writing YA novels during the pandemic, so I was reading a lot of them. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like everybody, it was great in kind of those creative pursuits. And for
Mhm.
me, it was like, oh, I'm really leaning into the romance. And before that, there was like 50 Shades of Grey, right? And I did that too, and also some content on Wattpad. But I think Catherine Center's Things You Save in a Fire, that was the book. And I still love Catherine Center to this day. I think she writes great novels, but she just beautifully articulated the female story of this one firefighter who was dealing with parental abandonment, issues of grief and love. And so there was just sort of this really nuanced, beautiful character who had these imperfections, and yet she was still going to through this journey of finding romantic love. And I just, I realized romance is so much more than I think it is, right? Or that I feel like as
Yeah.
a society, people deem it as. So that was really kind of my gateway into knowing intimately how much I would like romance novels. And before that, it was soap operas. So think about this, I'm one of 5 kids, and my oldest sister, who's 7 years older, she was really into soap operas, even though I don't know if she would admit this at her current age.
My sister watched Days of Our Lives. That was her go-to.
Meg, I watched all of them at some point.
Yeah.
I don't even know how. I was speaking of juggling. That's probably where I learned it at a young age. I would come home from school and just I'd record. So DVR,
Yeah.
I would watch them. I mean, General Hospital, Guiding Light, which used to be, there's just so many, but I remember specifically General Hospital did a great job of featuring teen romance.
Hmm.
And there was one between Robin and this character Stone, who was HIV positive, and he was her love interest. And so how they navigated that and
Yeah.
sexually what that looked like. I mean, just kind of all these interesting stories, and not just kind of the telenovela lens of it, but these characters also had really interesting, just backstories, and there were societal things that were brought into it at the time that weren't considered more taboo, but were brought to the surface in these daytime series that I found
Yeah.
compelling and interesting that they were talking about it. So that would be, I think, my start.
Okay. See, I remember watching because there was an era in the 90s where they were actually making sort of teen soap operas.
Yes.
So I'm thinking like Dawson's Creek. There
Yeah.
was a show called Swan's Crossing. Do
I
you remember
loved
that
that.
one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I watched that
That's
one
the one
too.
I remember running home from school to watch at 3 o'clock with my friend Danielle
Yep.
with the stupid dance at the beginning. Oh my
Oh
God.
my God, I loved that. Wait, was Swan's Crossing the Sarah Michelle Gellar? Was she?
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
And
that.
then there was 15, which had
Teen, yes.
what's his name in it?
Ryan Reynolds. He was
Ryan Reynolds.
the teen romances were great. And then I'm going to predate that by saying in the 80s, when I don't think I should have watched this, but my parents never banned
Oh, I
anything from
shouldn't have
us.
watched half the stuff I watched in my, yeah.
I kind of liked that they didn't, though,
Right.
right? I mean, I just feel like there was such a appreciation for things that even if they were more adult subjects, oh yeah, I need to figure this out or understand that this is in the world. I don't know if did you watch any of the Aaron Spelling, Love Boat, Heart to Heart, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, or any of
No,
those?
I mean, you say Aaron Spelling, and I think 90210, which I definitely watched.
Yeah.
What was I just going to say? Oh, just the watching of inappropriate material. The other thing was back then we would be watching these movies on TV. So they would be cutting out a lot
Yeah.
of the profanity and a lot of the sex, but there was still
True.
Dirty Dancing is a movie I probably saw when I was 9.
Yeah, I remember there was a sleepover when I was in 8th grade, Meg, where the parents had to announce that this movie would be screening as part of the sleepover.
That's very progressive of them to do.
Yeah.
There were no parents in my friend circle for doing that.
I was kind of surprised. I was like, what's the big deal? But then when I saw it,
You're like, oh, There's bras and grinding.
There's grinding and yeah, like
Yeah.
who's this Patrick Swayze guy? So yeah, it was. Speaking of which, they're gonna remake that movie. I don't know if you heard about
Of
that,
course they
but
are, because they can't come up with new movies. They just have to keep recycling the old
they
ones. But
can.
yeah, but it's for the
Yeah,
nostalgia, because all the people that remember watching it when they were 9 and then again at 20 and
yeah,
now at 40
yeah,
lining up for tickets. Okay, amazing. So thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
I'm just going to go quickly to your newsletter because I think it's fabulous and I think people should be reading it. I'm curious about when you launched it. I know from talking to you and kind of just seeing your most recent rebrand that it's gone through a couple of iterations. So I'm curious about how it's evolved over time and what subject matter has like gotten you the most attention or like resonated the most with your readers.
Oh, these are great questions. So thank you. And thank you for reading the Substack
Oh
and
yeah.
recommending it too. So I started back in February of 2021. So depending on when the recording date for this is, or sorry, this is per the recording date, but maybe not per the airing date. It's my 5th year anniversary on Substack.
Wow.
And Meg, like when I started, speaking of like just, party of five, it was very few people on Substack talking about TV and film.
Yeah.
There were a handful. And so there was no film stack, which is kind of what it's evolved into as well today. And I started with Beth's exceptional playlist or video playlist. And what I quickly came to realize a couple years, with this title is that nobody really understood what it meant, which makes sense. To me, it was like a cheeky reference to Zoe's exceptional playlist, which is a show I really liked. But I also realized that if people don't know what the Substack is about, that's a problem. So I met with somebody who's like, you should probably just call it what it is. And so that's where it became the best TV and film recommendations, which is fair because that's what it was. And then over time, I realized like I think it was back in October for my birthday, I launched You Need to Watch This with an exclamation point. And that felt like most like the voice and brand of this. Because
Yeah.
if I think about being a TV and film analyst, which goes back to my 20s and, predates that as far as me giving critiques about things and my opinions and sharing them freely
Right.
about what I'm watching. But if I think back to that, one of the things is less about sort of criticism, film and TV criticism in the sense of like the discipline of it and the art and whatnot, but more about like, what am I excited to watch and put out there for people to get excited about? And that's what I'm hoping I cultivate in the Substack is just that genuine enthusiasm for those topics. And I will say, when you think about what people are liking and feel passionate about, romance is up there. Like I have a good following of folks that we just will talk about a lot around British romance because
Yeah.
I will watch almost anything British
They
related.
do it
Period.
so well. They really do.
I love it. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's like a Pride and Prejudice thinking about Claire Holden and like just people that go deep on topics that are just really interesting to me. And
Mhm.
so I have a group of folks like that. And I have ones that like, I think when I created a Venn diagram at some point, I had slow horses, somebody somewhere, and then I'm trying to think of what the third one was, but it was like basically these are my readers. And I think you have the folks that are kind of more into the thrillers, espionage, spy mystery stuff, which is totally my wheelhouse and things I'm interested in.
Mhm.
Then the romance. And then I think the piece of just really touching, TV that connects people on an emotional level. And
Yeah.
that's Somebody Somewhere. So I had a lot of people that were really into Somebody Somewhere. And then Gen X people. So like I wrote about Jeff Buckley and that documentary. And that was like months and months ago, and I still get people liking that post because I
Yeah.
think it's just such a resonant, timely topic to
Mhm.
people that were into his music at the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to move on to genre, which might take a big chunk out of this conversation because it's such a huge topic. So, I will admit that I sometimes get squeamish about calling myself a romance writer for a couple of reasons. Everything I write has some element of romance. So it's sort of silly that I wouldn't just say, because you say, oh, I'm a writer. Oh, what do you write? If you say romance, something happens. Something
Yeah.
happens in the air.
There's a lull in the
Yes.
conversation. It feels
So,
like it.
or a face drops or oh, I don't like that kind of, So my three reasons for being hesitant about it are there is a weird stigma around it, which we could go into fairly deeply, I'm sure. It's such a saturated industry now. So like professionally, it's kind of like knowing where to place yourself in it is really challenging. So it's like almost finding like what's your subgenre, or even I'm going to coin this phrase if it's not already invented, the micro genre.
Yeah.
So like the genre within the subgenre.
Yep.
And then just the fact, and this is number three, which I just kind of covered, was that the term romance is going to bring up 100 different things for 100 different people of what they
Yeah.
think that is. So it being such a massive umbrella for this big web of like subgenres, it's that thing where we have to label everything, you know, saying, oh, this is a romantasy, or this is like a vampire werewolf thing, or this is a paranormal meets, you know, electromagnetic superhero. Like it gets like really specific.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I feel like those genres are almost becoming mainstream now, but there's still, I think, an attitude from people who don't read or don't engage in romance that romance is that mainstream sort of like cisgender boy meets girl. They fall
Mhm.
in love. They have very mild complications that trip them up, and then they happily ever after, quote unquote. Do you think the shift away from that is saying something about our culture currently and what people are craving in stories? Like, what's your opinion about why we're seeing, like, right now it's still romantasy. Romantasy is still like the hot ticket.
Mhm.
It's not really my cup of tea, but it's enough people's cup of tea that it's where it is right now. What's your take on that? Like, why do you think that's happened?
I love this question because it really made me think about survival and like how the romance industry, which I think, even though it's really broad, to your point, we should call it like the love industry, which
Yes.
makes it even broader. Because to me, like the layers that are interesting, fine, the romance, whether there's a happily ever after, happy for now kind of ending, it's really about like the evolution of the characters, and that can be self-love. And I think self-love has to come before all the other kinds of love.
Yeah.
So I like the love industry, but go with me on the analogy for a second. So if you think of it as like survival and thriving, like purely biological, diversifying is the way that like the romance industry will continue to mutate and grow. And I don't mean this like in a virus kind of perspective, but like thinking like, that's
Some
the
people
first thing
might
you're
think of
like
it that
a
way.
cold,
Yeah.
but like genetic mutations, right? You could like plants or animals or whatever. So you need to be able to create new ways to like survive and stimulate demand. And I think like romance industry has been masterful at this.
Yeah.
And like I was looking at some of these statistics that the Atlantic published back in October of 2025 that said in 2024, despite declining sales in other publishing categories, romance fans bought so many books that
Yeah.
they helped push total print book sales into the black. And so like I think about all those different categories that you're talking about, and they're called tropes or subgenres or whatever we want to call them, but like dark romance, workplace romance, you know, friends to lovers, sports, you know, romantasy, people shifting into werewolves and like having feral sex, like whatever you want to call it. Every time I go to my book club, I learn something new. We'll just put that.
Yes.
But like all these different variations and the lingo and the acronyms, like they serve to create like this language and connection for community.
Yes.
And so I see the value with that because you're like, oh, you're like me. You get this stuff. And it's almost like if you go into the subreddit world, which I sometimes live in for some of these topics and tropes, like
Yeah.
you're like, there's just some really like active voices of people that are commenting and thinking about these topics. And so I like the exploration because if anything, it serves as connection and community for
Yeah.
people. And do I need to feel the need to label everything? It's exhausting. And I don't personally love it because I think there's, you know, love is nuanced, but I do love that this is getting taken seriously in a way that like other aspects of fiction have in the past. And now it's like romance is developing and evolving, kind of back to my genetic mutations analogy. So that's how I look at it. Like it's a good thing.
Absolutely. So you said something about the community around like even the lingo.
Yeah.
My experience as like a 40 something who writes the stories that I really want to read and reads the stories that are like it because that's like where my heart is. Sometimes I feel like there's like little cliques forming. And sometimes if you feel like if you don't know the lingo, like I already feel like, do I know how to talk to young adults about young adult fiction? And the answer is like, no, I don't. And so Would your advice be to actually like go into these spaces and try to learn it? You know what it reminds me of is when I became a mom and reading on like the mom forums, and they were using
Yes.
all these acronyms, and I had to look them all up because I'm like, I don't know what these women are talking about, like at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think,
I still don't, by the way. I still
yeah,
feel so. And the other thing is, to your point, like I'm thinking back, I went to an author event at a romance bookstore a couple weeks ago, and I labeled something the author had written as polyamory. And then in the response that she provided, she kept saying, why choose? Why choose? And I was like, what is she talking about? Like, I asked the question. I had no understanding of the response because I didn't know this why choose
yeah,
an actual thing out there on, developed out of TikTok or wherever it came from, where why choose a partner, have as
right.
many partners
Have
as
them
you want. And
all.
that's
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel like at some point there has to be some sort of dictionary. Maybe we create that, Meg, of like all of these.
Yes.
Our research has led us to kind of like categorize these things and then publish that book or however
Yeah.
publish that zine, because I do think there's just so many different pieces of this. And then you can also feel easily disconnected
Right.
if you don't understand. And the way I've tried to lean into that, so I host the romantic or romance book club for the Ashland Library, the virtual one on a monthly basis, and those are avid romance enthusiasts who know like almost everything I think there is to know about romance and
Right.
classifications. And one thing I've appreciated, it's not like a typical book club where you're like, we're all reading ACOTAR this month and discussing it. No, like they give you a genre and then you have to like basically do the research to understand what is the genre?
Yeah.
What are the confines? How am I defining this? And come to the club with your book.
Yeah.
And so I've like often struggled because I've spent so much time trying to be by the book and translating the genres. I know I take this club way too seriously, but
No, you don't. This is what they need.
part of
Yeah.
it's like, okay, like for next, so for our last book club, we had the innocent hero, right? And the innocent hero can mostly refer to a male that hasn't had sex yet, okay? But it
Hmm.
can also refer to different qualities or traits that define innocence that are,
Right.
oftentimes they go together, but they don't have to. So I kind of enjoyed learning a bit about that. And then as a next step, for this, for March Book Club, it's Omegaverse. And that was not, I had no idea what this world was.
Right.
And so I just put it out there in the chat on Zoom and I was like, dialing a friend here. I know I host this book club, didn't choose these genres. They were chosen. I have to read a book and I need help. And one of the women gave like 3 different links to how to define and how Omegaverse is, what the genre is. And I just am like, and she keeps like a regular Google Docs of like book recommendations. And I'm like, it'd be really nice to have these definitions and start talking about that because
Yeah.
there's just so much to just take apart and unpack here.
I'm would be interested to know how each genre comes to be. Like obviously someone coins it or
Yeah.
whatever the term is now and says, okay, now this, and then enough people start trying to emulate it that it becomes something where you can actually find a book under that genre. I found actually there was a period, it was actually around the time when I was reading all that YA, where I was specifically looking for banned books.
Yep.
I was part of like a children's literature organization, so there was a lot of talk around that topic. And what I found was in searching for banned books, I was doing a lot of very diverse reading. The characters were diverse, the subjects were diverse. And that makes me think that, well, it's sad that those books are being buried because this is another question I have for you, because I know how I feel about it. But do you think the romance industry is doing enough to bring diverse love stories to light? Or are we creating these subgenres and maybe inadvertently
Mm.
keeping stories like on the fringe that should be mainstream? That's a weird question, the way I worded it.
I get what you're going at. It's like, is the industry doing enough to kind of bring and elevate diverse stories, right, to readers? And I
Yes.
think it is a good question. It came up, speaking of my monthly book club, because last year we had 2 months where one month we did, I think it was Indigenous book club. And then one
Mm-hmm.
month we had African American. And as part of that, we carved out a piece of time to understand like what the stats look like. And so like the Ripped Bodice was a good source. They're a bookseller, very well-known romance bookstore out of Brooklyn, New York. And they published yearly like BIPOC representation out of the data that they had from like leading publishers. And they stopped in 2024. Make of that what you will.
Right.
And they published a figure, like at least from, I think it was like 2016 to 2024, showing that actually representation had increased. It wasn't like staggering. I think it was like 8% to 11%. But, like to me, there has to be an intentionality to it. I feel like the book club helps me get there. But I think as an industry overall, I do think the sort of byproduct, unfortunately, could be that it's sort of missing out on some of the more diverse representation. The other piece of that, kind of back to the categorization piece we were talking about earlier, is like sometimes those stories are getting told, I think just culturally, like I've read a few books in the past, I don't know, 2 years that represented, different sort of Central American culture and South American, and like kind of bringing that into a story, even though it wasn't it was part of like the protagonist's backstory and a lot of that into the culture and how the story is told.
Right.
And so maybe and that's what this data kind of serves to look at, is like how much of that is being brought into stories without it being called out per se. So I think that's another thing I'd be curious about, like in terms of what that data, but I couldn't get anything more recent on that data since 2024. So
yeah. Okay. And I think too with, because I was primarily reading young adult fiction, which I think goes through a tighter ringer in terms of what they squeeze out and take off shelves, because and particularly not just with, cultural origins, but just types of romantic relationships that we're leaving a lot of them out of the conversation. And that's being done on purpose, by groups who don't think it's appropriate for young people to read about what young people are doing and feeling. Which I don't understand as a person who writes about young people. So it's like, I think it's an uphill battle, but.
Yeah, I know, like, so in another aspect, just thinking about like diverse stories too, from like a perspective of like religion or ethnicity. I remember I went to a book event a couple of years ago for a debut Jewish romance author at the time. And it was after October 7th. She had mentioned that there were a small number of Jewish writers at that point, romance writers. And just like, in terms of the rising concerns around like anti-Semitism. And so, even to the point of like making choices to have a certain type of salad, like an Israeli salad, that was taken out of the book by just the ingredients that were listed. And I was like, wow, I think that opened my eyes to the fact that like there are things and decisions happening around these different, like whether, ethnicity, religion, color, that are affecting, representation in books in a negative way. So,
Okay, let's move on to something less depressing. Although this is
it's important.
Like this is kind of depressing too. Yeah. No, but it's more of there's a debate going on. Or there's, the way I worded it on my notes is the inflammatory chatter. And I see it a lot on social media about romance novels being considered, smut rather than literature. And it's often by people who don't, actually read the stuff they're labeling smut, but just hear the word romance novel or hear, And what did I just hear about how Harlequin is like no longer doing historical romance?
Yeah, I read that too.
Like, that's a weird move.
Yeah.
We could probably talk about that in a whole other episode. Like, why are they eliminating an entire genre from like, there's all kinds of weird stuff like that going on. And also I feel like there's even, in writer circles, it's weird the way this happens. Like people who don't write romance almost are embittered toward it because it can be so lucrative for the people who break through, and it can be such a consistent way to continue to get published. Like it's potentially easier to break through if you're sticking to the tropes and the formulas. And like, once you hit it, you just can regurgitate the same story with different characters in a different setting, and people will like eat it, so there's I think there's weird attitudes about it, both from inside the writer community and also people who are completely outside. So I'm curious, like what your take is on the argument, the smut versus literature argument. And do you believe that romance does or can provide an intellectual as well as an emotional experience for readers? And also, why do you think there's so much shaming around romance, even amongst fellow romance writers sometimes?
Yeah. I can't promise to answer all of those. So I might need to be reminded on some of
That's
the
okay. It was a loaded question. I do that sometimes.
It was like what we call like a Jason Bateman smart list question. He asked I realize I do this too, where I'm like asking multiple questions within a question and then expect somebody to know the answer. So
well, I'm sitting here looking at my notes. There are 3 questions in a row, but I also blew up my introductory sentence into like a 2 hour monologue. So apologies.
All
So
good.
first, let's say, what is your, because I kind of know you, so I feel like I know which direction you're going to go in. I don't think you think romance is smut.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something too, is like, why is smut like a dirty word too? That's
Mm-hmm.
just my own thought about it. It's like there's an art and creativity to being able to write what people consider smut or
Yeah.
just spicy, however we want to flavor it to make it socially okay, spicy scenes. There's an art to it. And
Oh,
I do
yeah.
think it is, I think there's a beauty to it as well in terms of like how females, especially like if I'm just thinking about like how we are can be like thinking about this imaginatively in our heads of these scenarios that stimulate sort of attraction and things like that. And I do think we can learn about ourselves through reading these things. So I'm putting that all out there because I think from an education perspective, from like a creativity perspective, from a discovery perspective, like I don't think smut's a bad, like in my mind, smut's not a bad word. I understand how it's like out there in
Right.
the world. It is considered bad, and we find other words to kind of describe it. But I will say, I'm also the person at the beginning of the podcast that said, I'm embarrassed to watch certain shows. So I am a series of contradictions and human. So,
Yes.
but like ideologically, I do believe very strongly in the value of smut and in writing, in romance.
Hmm.
And does it need to be there? If it doesn't necessarily serve the story, then no. If it serves the story and enhances the connection between the lead characters, then 100% go for it.
Yeah.
I also like speaking of just these forums of readers, people have really strong opinions on who does that best, right? Who writes these scenes best. And I think that's an interesting like thing to know as well, as far as like getting to the point of understanding bodies and sexuality and what you like and don't like. And I don't know, I feel like there's such a value to all this stuff. It's a shame that it gets sort of almost like dusted to the side of the room and just labeled as bad.
Yeah. Well, and what I can say to it as well is I feel like because, there are some like really hot-headed people will go as far as to say it's like a form of pornography, which I
Yeah.
disagree with. I
Mhm.
mean, if there is like, what do you call it? Like erotica. There is some kinds of writing that is literally just like sex scene after sex scene after sex scene. And to your point, that's not really
Yeah.
furthering a story. It's there to create an arousal for whoever's reading it. And that's, we should have that at our disposal since, video pornography is there for literally anyone who wants it for free on the internet 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So, what was I going to say? Oh, yes. The reason I think it is valuable in books, especially, and maybe especially, well, I'm not going to say just for female readers, because I think it's actually
Yeah.
really valuable for men too. I don't know how many of them are reading it, but what it does is instead of being like handed a visual of two characters like engaged in something sensual, you're given the words to kind of see it how you want to see it play out. You're given, and not just the words of what's happening physically, but what's happening emotionally. And that is harder, I think, to have come across in film. Like you can do it, you know what I mean? But like,
Yeah.
I think there are ways to empathize more with the experience when it's in writing. And I'll admit to being the person who, when a scene is done really well, I will just stop and read it again. I'm like, why was this so good? Because I want to know how to do this as a writer. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And then sometimes it's not done really well, and you're like, let's get past this and move on.
I will say the Innocent Hero book I read, by the time they finally sort of got to this more sexual chemistry place, I saw them as such platonic friends.
That it was
I
weird.
couldn't even go there with that
Yeah.
the writer. I was like, it almost ruined the story for me, and I had to skip over parts because I was like, this is not,
Yeah.
it's not serving this. So it's like a good example of where sometimes it just doesn't work, like based on how the story is told. Now, I will say that was more the exception in romance that I've read, but it was definitely like noticeable. It was like it was just awkward. I was like, I can't take
Yeah.
it.
Well, and if it's awkward for you, it's one thing if like it's awkward for them too in the book, but clearly it was not,
Yeah.
but it was awkward for you. It's kind of like you're like, should I be watching this? I don't know. This
Yeah.
seems like not something they should be doing. So yeah.
Right. And to your point, I like when people do it really well and you want to reread it, like it could just be that's an area that the author hasn't yet sort of developed, or it also could just be an area that maybe isn't like their place. Like that's not where they want to spend their time. And
Right.
so, you know,
And I also think there's such a spectrum of how you can portray those moments. Like
mhm.
some people do it really well with just like these subtle, like poetic
Yeah.
passages that are not graphic, are not even talking about body parts. It's just about like the feeling and the experience. And you know what's happening. It's kind of like in a movie when they're kissing and then they wake up with no clothes on in bed. It's like,
Yeah.
you get there even though you weren't in,
Right.
the activity. But then there are people who are also really good at providing you with the activity. Sometimes I'm always, looking for different ways to talk about things. And I think that's a good way to learn. Like, what words do they use for the
The
various body
language, right?
parts? Yes.
Yeah, the language is huge. I mean, okay, so I'm going to disclose something that's probably going to shock and horrify you,
Oh,
but
cool.
we're going there on your
Yeah.
podcast. So we'll just have to put like a explicit rating on it for the last 10 minutes of your podcast.
Okay.
But okay, so just putting this out there. So Omegaverse, this going back to this genre. So there's different power levels. You're either an alpha. So an alpha is like, as it sounds, the one sort of in control and, dispensing the orders. And then you have the betas and the omegas who are more, beta being the more like, subservient in this power dynamic. So the reason I mention this is part of this genre, and I don't know if it's always exclusively attached to this genre, but part of it is shifting. So like, humans becoming wolves kind of activity, right?
Hmm.
So they have to create this universe where it works. And there's all this sexual stuff that happens because part dog, part human.
Right. Both mammals who
Nat-
enjoy sex. Okay. Yes. Moving on.
Naturally, world building. So the terminology of things, speaking of Reddit disclosures, there's a term called knotting, which I've now put out there. And I don't know if you know that term.
How's it spelled?
Knotting.
Oh, okay.
And it's, if you imagine an animal, if you've ever had a male dog, it's how they lock with a female
Hmm.
when they're females in heat. And apparently this is a thing that is in romance, that's in these stories and
Yeah.
part of it. And people feel very passionately about knotting. And I had to look this up and I was like, I don't know how to do this, but I just gonna look it up. And I also have to define the questions for the book club and stuff and figure out how far do I want to go into some of the lingo. But back to the point about the lingo, it's just, this is like, I'm trying to think where we started, why I put this in here, but it was definitely one of those things where I was like, is it serving the story? Okay, yes, maybe. Did I need a world in which I needed to understand how humans could act like dogs? Maybe not.
Right.
But people love this stuff, and it is kind of interesting the way they write the sex scenes for these specific genres. So that was just my closure. But yeah, nodding.
Okay. Well, now, we definitely need a glossary. I'm sure there are glossaries out there, so we can.
I'm sure, and
I
think
pull
Reddit
from them when we make our guide.
Advertisement. I'm your Sherpa for the lingo. Yes, I will.
Fantastic. Okay, so here's a question because we are both Gen X women. So we have experienced romance in books, films, television for a number of decades. And I think like fashion, it's gone through a lot of evolutions and revolutions. So I just want to know, in your opinion, is there one decade or era that you feel really got it right? And why was that?
You're going to be surprised to hear this.
Okay.
Because it took a bit of delving into like how a lot of those soap operas and teen soaps and 90s stuff we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I love Hollywood classic films. And so if I'm being true to myself and where some of those like romance origin stories developed that have been further mutated and created subgenres from, I will say 1940s, early 50s.
Wow. Okay.
Just going back to classic Hollywood, Girl and Me, now Voyager with Bette Davis, how this character is sort of taken from sort of an abusive life where she's not, living in the attic, and goes on this cruise and just works. Like at this time, she meets a psychiatrist who works with her on like a lot of her issues and what's going on and what's been and really helps her to grow. And then she meets this lovely man as well as part of the process. And I just like so much about that story. I'm like, wait, this was in the 40s. People did stuff like that, talked about this stuff. And so I think it's been like these findings of beautiful like love stories of what just healing looks like and love. And so that was one. And then Roman Holiday, I mean, Audrey Hepburn, Gregory Peck, sort of that tragic star-crossed lover romance, between a princess and a journalist, and then An Affair to Remember, right? Which is the precursor to Sleepless in Seattle.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like not just like the glamour and the beauty and the style, which is all there in all those films, but just the depth of what love can do and inspire in your partner and in each other.
So, can I ask when you first saw some of those movies? Were you younger? Clearly, you've rewatched them.
Yeah, I watched a lot of these with my dad on like, it's just such a weird thing to be like, I watch love stories with my dad, but those old Hollywood classics, I mean, we still talk about these films today. And he, like, whenever he reads my stuff, that's stuff he always gravitates to. So I think it's always at the top of my mind, but like, Turner movie classics and stuff like that, whatever was on TV. And I just, this kind of bygone era and being so curious about the people that were all so glamorous, which didn't really exist. Like our time has really been more about like how people are in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so the fact that people would do like kind of like put on this sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say facade because it's not that, but it's more like there's just how you certain conduct to how you are in the world and move in the world. And I think I'm utterly fascinated. And a lot of these stories have been, like reused.
Yeah.
So yeah, I figured that might surprise you, but I went
No,
with
it's really cool. And like I'm finding too, because when I started, I wrote a little bit on my newsletter, which I called The Romantic for a while. And now I've kind of stepped away from it. But I was writing kind of about the movies and books that like made me the way I am about romance. And a lot of mine were like from the 90s and the 80s. But rewatching them as an adult, and I would probably find this true if I started watching some more classic movies too.
Yeah.
You have gained so much knowledge and you've experienced so many different kinds of relationships that it's a totally different experience to watch those movies now. And there's even some elements where you're like, ugh, this is what formulated my ideas of what romance was going to be. And so no wonder I struggled a little bit with this.
I know you're always going for like the like emo dude. I think about like My So-Called Life. I was so that show came out and I was like, my God, I was Angela Chase. I wanted to like, I even wanted my hair to be red. Like I didn't fit with my skin tone, but like all of that said, like
it didn't fit with hers either. That was the point. Yeah. Remember when she died it the first time? You're like, oh.
I know. So yeah, the Jordan, I was going to call him Jared because this is
Jordan Catalano.
Jordan Catalano dude. And really Brian was the one she should have been with. But anyway, that's aside. Another
he
episode.
Also made a lot of mistakes in terms of that was a great show.
Great show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss if I said like those probably impacted and made me who I am. But man, if I think about like that era, that 40s, 50s, I felt like they got romance right before like the Marilyn Monroe stuff, because that stuff was all kind of.
Well, and that's when it kind of became a joke.
Exactly.
Like I struggle with love stories that make fun of even like, rom-coms that kind of like make fun of parenthood or make fun of like one night stands, or it rubs me the wrong way, or infidelity, like make it like a gag. I'm like, this isn't how I want this to be handled. So I've struggled with movies like that before.
The movie you will want to revisit, and I don't know if you have since it initially came out, is Love Actually, just because I feel like that is the one that is aged the worst.
Poorly. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think I watched it maybe in my 20s, late 20s. I can't remember when it came out, but the reason I watched it was for Alan Rickman because I was on a super Alan Rickman kick. But he's such a shit in it.
I know.
That was like the first time, aside from Die Hard, where he was a shit, that I had watched it.
Did you watch Truly, Madly, Deeply? Is that why?
Yes. I watched that. Oh, and Sense and Sensibility.
Oh my God,
with the blonde hair. Colonel Brandon. My friend like got me into that. That's one I could rewatch like 100 times.
Yeah. So you were like, this guy's amazing, which he is. I finally saw Truly, Madly, Deeply on Valentine's Day. I had never seen it ever. And I finally watched it. So yeah, I feel you. And yeah, the depiction of love for women is just not good in that movie.
Right.
No,
it's very icky. I saw a clip from it, where the best friend goes and like confesses his love to her. I'm like, this is the most selfish bullshit. I'm like, she just got married, asshat. You missed your chance. You're done.
Do you know what happens at the end of that scene?
I forget.
She kisses him.
Oh, so gross.
So gross.
It's like, well, it's so gross. And it's just so like, why are you
rewarding this behavior?
Yes. Yeah. You know what? And it's funny. This is totally off topic, but there's a scene. I wanted to write about this before because like, I'm fully aware that like infidelity happens. It's like a bump in the road for a lot of relationships. And sometimes it's the end for some of them, but it's definitely not something you can ignore in romance in particular. And I read this book once. It was like somebody recommended it to me because they said it reminded them of me and my writing. And it's funny because it was like an adult half, and then like the other half of the book was them as teenagers. So it was kind of like that, they grew up and got back together kind of thing. But like the woman was like dating a man and he had a child and they were like living together. And the whole book, she's like re-falling in love with this other guy. And like by the end of the book, her current boyfriend is just like, yeah, if you want to be with him, you should be with him. I'm like, what? And it's like that scene in Sleepless in Seattle where her dorky fiance is like, yeah, get out of here. I'm like, this would never happen. This is so, it's the like not giving space for the emotional effect that you bailing on someone.
Yeah.
It's like, we just don't write their part. We don't write, Keira Knightley's husband's feelings about her kissing his best friend and about him coming to the door with this, bullshit confession.
I know. Right. Because she goes back and sits on the couch with him and is just like, smiling.
Everything's fine. We just got married and I just made out with your friend. Yeah. Because
I mean, realistically, Meg, I would have gone right and been like, tell my husband, like, okay, this just happened.
Right. I'm like, maybe we should go back in time and rethink our relationship, which was clearly not very stable to begin with. But yes, I agree. I could rewatch that and probably have a field day writing about it because there were so many parts of it that made me uncomfortable. And maybe that was part of its job. But then to your point, it also just really gave the guys like all these like grand romantic gestures to like, oh, we'll just go blow up this person's marriage, or I'll just sleep with my secretary and like my wife will stay with me.
It rewarded like poor behavior. And even those like 3 douchey guys, I think, that are like at the like working on the porno, how they hook up with the hot girls or something. Like there's just this like unrealistic sort of ending for those people where you're like,
yeah, you kind of want them to not have the best of endings because you're like, oh, maybe you'll learn something. Oops, I guess not. Not this time.
I guess this was written by one of you.
Not this time, romance. Okay, so last question, because this is about your recent text. Yes. You know what I'm talking about.
Text.
Your recent test that you took online, which is about happily ever afters and how you were worried about getting in hot water with your book club because you're feeling like a pull that maybe that's not something you need all the time in romance. And is it truly romance if the couple doesn't end up together? So I'd love for you to just expand on that for a minute or two, on that tension of, because with romance as a genre, there's so much expectation, right? And I've heard this too. It's like, well, if you're teasing that these two people are going to get together, you have to let them get together or your readers will revolt.
That's right. It always has to be positive, optimistic, and giving sentiment. So there's 2 acronyms, right? We have the HEA, which is happily ever after. And we also have HFN, which is happy for now.
Right.
And both essentially mean the same thing, that we're giving positive, optimistic ending. Right. Story. So typically when the romances the books that I would consider romances that I've gotten the most out of, not in all cases, because I mentioned like Catherine Center and there are plenty of authors where I'm like, okay, this felt earned, right? But it has to be earned. So I feel like, I don't know if you read Heart the Lover by Lily King.
No, but I should. I'm writing things down as you talk. So
I definitely think Heart the Lover is worth it. And it is, I read it in like a day. It's a really short book. It is probably the most romantic book I read last year. And it wouldn't be classified as romance because it lacks the HEA attribution.
Right.
But it is about like these trio of friends, and specifically 2 of them who are kind of like the right people to be together and their life and where it takes them. And I don't want to give too much away, but I was like so moved by so much of the story. And to me, that was like, there's so much romance there. But again, kind of going back to like what we were saying early on with just love in like category versus romance. Maybe this one gets booked in the love. I have been in hot water before because I innocently asked a question of like, and we surveyed the group of like, do we need an HEA in a romance book? And everybody said yes, with the exception of me, because I don't necessarily, I think, once they expanded it to HFN, which is, happy for now, I was like, okay, so like, they don't necessarily, and we talked a little bit about the definition, and one of the women said, well, they don't have to get married. And I was like, well, that's good.
Yeah, because
they don't want to get married.
Right. Some people really
maybe
don't
they're
need
kids
to do that. Yeah.
So, but we need to have like the illusion that there's like the ending that they're still together and open. And I remember there was one book, and I can't remember who it was by. And I'm like, it's killing me because I don't think I put it on Goodreads either. So now I'm like always trying to look up like piece parts of what I know in Google.
Yeah.
Search for it. And I'm like, I know I read this book. But essentially it was about one character who wanted to have a baby. And she kind of had this on and off relationship with somebody. And then he didn't really want a child. And I was like, well, that's realistic. Like that can happen in a relationship where they have different sort of expectations of whether they want a family of, with children or not. And so she decides to have a child and they separate. They're not together. And I liked that journey because even though it showed, yes, they were together, they loved each other, she got pregnant, she decided she wanted to, he wasn't able to. What I feel like happens at the end of the book a lot, we talk about this too in the book club, is like, is it a forced ending to fit in a certain genre or to fit a label? And sometimes I think the ending to get to the happy part is rushing things and not like really being authentic to who the character is.
Or dealing with what they've had to go through. Yeah.
Exactly. So in this particular book, it was considered romance because they did get them together. It felt earned. I would have been happier if they didn't get back together, to be honest. I think love is not always a happy ending.
Right.
It can be. And I think kind of understanding the different chapters or eras in your life that like, okay, I was with this person at this point. It served me this way. And like, not necessarily being transactional about it, being realistic about it, I think is lacking from some of that designation.
Yeah. I also think there can be a love story that ends hopefully or positively, but not because the characters are together. And that's like the whole finding yourself piece where it's like, maybe I need this time to move forward on something else. Or like it's an interesting one because I do feel like sometimes the happy ending is kind of epilogic. It's almost like, okay, all this happened. It's like, and now here's a pretty picture of how it looks at the end. Like it's almost just like painted like a little tableau. And what I love about YA in particular, and why I write it and read it so much, is they're all happy for nows because they're kids. You know what I mean? It's like, especially if you're an adult reading or writing it, that the chances of those two kids still being together in 30 years, it happens. I mean, people do marry their high school sweethearts, but they're going to go through a lot before they get there. Yeah. And so I like that piece of writing about young people because I think it's a reminder that you're going to have a lot of love stories and they can't all end happily ever after unless you're going to have like a line of husbands like that you're just dragging to your deathbed.
And the truth is, right, because it sets up like an unrealistic expectation, but also happily ever after could mean more than one partner in your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't be happily ever after with this one partner. So yeah, I just find some of that to be like, your fingers in your ear, like pretending the stuff isn't and not really appreciating that you don't need that ending. So that's why like in the past, typically when I was saying about I only started reading romance in COVID, I guess I was reading romance and fiction because I've always read fiction earlier, but it was never designated as romance because it didn't have the happily ever after. Yeah. Right. So anyway, so much more to talk about.
I know we could talk for days, but I think I'll end it there because I did actually get to all of my questions and yay. So I'm looking forward to making this into something neat and tidy that I can present to our readers and just stick around after I say goodbye so we can chat for 5 more minutes. But thank you, Beth, for being here. Everyone check out, you need to watch this. I will put links to everything in the show notes and everybody go get your happy for nows. All right, cheers. Hang tight. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, you can let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, rating, or review, depending on where you're listening, or by sharing this podcast with your favorite people. Talk Fiction is part of a dynamic anthology of short fiction, essays, poetry, humor, and multimedia experiments written and produced by me, Meg Olders. If you're into the stuff I'm making, or you're just into supporting the dynamic individual who makes it, I hope you'll consider becoming a free or paid subscriber at megolders.substack.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. You coming on today, I'm all like jazzed to talk about this. Yeah. I want to feel jazzed to talk about stuff on my podcast.
I know. You're right. And it kind of like, I was thinking about this because I think you liked this video on Instagram too. And I'm really not on Instagram all that much, but it's like when I go there, I'm like, okay, like 10 minutes of my attention. And there was one from Reese Witherspoon about chasing your talents versus like chasing your dreams. Mm-hmm. I was talking to my daughter about it yesterday because I was like that, like it seems so basic, but it's so true. It's like knowing what you're really good at and what you bring to the table is really everything. And like pursuing that's going to like you pursue your fulfillment through those activities that align with your talents. Right.
And then you don't burn out so much because you're not trying to do something that you're not good at. and make
Yep.
it look like you're good at it. Like that's
Exactly.
exhausting, completely exhausting.
Yeah.
So, yes, I did like that post.
Yeah.
Although easy for her to say because she's like a billionaire, but
I know.
it's
I
super
know. I
easy.
know.
Like,
And then she's like, I always ask people. So I was telling my daughter, I was like, you might be asked this question at some point. What are your talents? And it's not the easiest question to answer all the time, right? Because it's
right.
kind of also like appreciating like some feedback you've heard from people on you, right? Where they're like for me, it's like oftentimes you're not afraid to ask questions. You make things clear and you're okay to speak up and ask those questions when other people aren't.
Right.
I've always been like, really? Is that true? Like, like I just ask because I feel lost otherwise. And,
Hmm.
you know, and I was thinking about that because I've been leaning into that today a little bit, just with like, wait, these things and not really being afraid just to voice my thoughts. And
Yeah.
it's benefited people just this morning. And I was like, oh, it's kind of nice to like think that way. So just
I
that
think
one
it's the
video.
I think it's the aging into our 40s thing too. We're hitting that point where we're like, I don't really give a shit if you agree with me on what I'm saying. Like, I feel really strongly about this, and I have for 20 years, and I've never said anything. And
Yeah.
damn it, I'm going to say some stuff now. So, yeah, I'm with you on that.